So just how racist is Trump's racist America? I mean, we know that racism has skyrocketed under the white supremacist God King, don't we? That is, if you believe the general narrative in the media. Well, thankfully, rather than assert truths because they conform to an ideological predisposition, some people actually do the hard work and try to measure such things as racist or prejudiced attitudes, such as Daniel J. Hopkins and Samantha Washington from the University of Pennsylvania. And unfortunately, to the chagrin of the mainstream media, this working paper from the aforementioned researchers found that racism has actually decreased since the election of President Trump. Now, how exactly do you go about measuring racial prejudice? As the co-author of the paper noted in an article on 538. Measuring prejudice is notoriously difficult, but we were able to draw on a panel survey which has posed questions about political issues to the same group of people 13 times since late 2007. Our panel asked the respondents, a representative sample of about 500 white Americans, to rate different racial groups' work ethic and trustworthiness repeatedly. So rather than random samples of different individuals at different points in time, this survey is able to draw on the same people over the course of more than a decade to map their changes in attitude. And how did the authors measure the work ethic and trustworthiness of different racial groups exactly? From the paper itself. To measure prejudice, we follow prior work by assessing white respondents' beliefs in stereotypes. Specifically, our panelists were repeatedly asked to rate blacks, Hispanics, Latinos, and whites on two stereotype scales, work ethic and trustworthiness. The work ethic measure asked respondents to place each group on a 0 to 100 scale from hardworking to lazy. The trustworthiness scale instead anchored the 101-point scale at trustworthy 0 or untrustworthy 100. And so do the results. As the chart below shows, average levels of prejudice among white Americans fell after Trump was elected president. On average, anti-black prejudice dropped sharply among whites from a score of 8.1 just before the 2016 election to 5.4 2 years later in late 2018. That marked the lowest level of anti-black prejudice since the study was first conducted in late 2008. Prejudice against Hispanics also dropped from 3.6 just before the 2016 election to 1.6 in late 2018. In both instances, declines were larger among Democrats, but they appeared among Republicans too. And here are some more comments from the paper. Between 2007 and 2019, the trajectory for anti-black prejudice is generally downward, with a pronounced drop between the November-December 2016 wave and the October-November 2018 wave. That timing is instructive. The decline was most pronounced after November 2016, and so after Trump had been elected president. The decline was apparently not driven by Trump's candidacy or by white Americans' reaction to his campaign rhetoric in 2015 and 2016, but instead by their reactions to his presidency itself. For the full population, the decline in mean anti-black prejudice is -2. Although the magnitude of the change is slightly larger among Democrats than Republicans, there is little evidence that Democrats are differentially responsive. Anti-Hispanic prejudice also declined between Trump's fall 2016 election and fall 2018, although that decline is driven by shifts among people who identified as Democrats in 2012. In fact, the average 2012 to 2018 decline for Democrats is 3.7, while for Republicans, anti-Hispanic prejudice increased by a small amount, 0.3. There was also a question around race-related policies. One related survey item asked respondents whether the government should make special efforts on behalf of black Americans or whether black Americans should help themselves. This figure shows that between 2012 and 2018, respondents on average moved away from saying blacks should help themselves, with little evidence the changes were concentrated among either Democrats or Republicans. Overall, the results seem to indicate little differential decline in prejudice or racial animus among Democrats. The shifts in prejudice appear roughly comparable even when analysing Republicans who did or did not support Trump in the early 2016 primaries, nor were the changes in prejudice concentrated among those with higher or lower levels of education. Now, to head off any criticism that this study must have been done by conservative researchers or is biased in some way, let's hear from the authors themselves from the abstract. In his campaign and first few years in office, Donald Trump consistently defied contemporary norms by using explicit negative rhetoric targeting ethnic racial minorities. And again, in the conclusion, they state, as a political leader, Donald Trump has used racist rhetoric to build political support. So this is not some apologist Trumpian activism on the part of these particular scholars. And given the data, they had to conclude that theoretical perspectives emphasising the normalisation of prejudice or opinion leadership both lead us to expect that expressed prejudice may have increased in this period, especially among Republicans or Trump supporters, but our findings indicate the opposite, a result more consistent with theories of thermostatic response in which the public moves away from the direction of current policy making. To be sure, changes in expressed prejudice in this period might be the product of factors other than Trump. The decade in question saw events including the election of the first black president and rising attention to police-involved shootings. It is also possible that Trump's rhetoric clarified anti-racist norms, a valuable question for future study. But given the declines in prejudice appear concentrated in the period after Trump's election, it seems quite plausible that it was not simply Trump's rhetoric, but also his accession to the presidency that pushed public opinion in the opposite direction. So there's an interesting theory that people did react to Trump's rhetoric by opposing it. They reaffirmed their commitment to anti-racist principles rather than be swayed by it. My feeling is that racism has been on the decline for decades, and the latest move is simply a continuation of that long-term trend, and that Trump's ascension had little or no effect at all. Just look at indicators such as the rate of interracial marriage, which now sits at 17% of all US newlyweds, compared with just 3% in 1967. Race relations have gotten progressively better over time and continue to improve. The biggest impediment today are the offence archaeologists of the woke left that see racism everywhere and have thus rehabilitated the racial imagination with their consistent focus on identity politics. As usual, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.